Welcome, everybody, to Highside, Lowside. Spurg is there. I am Zack. This is Season 9, Episode 7. The topic is AI a better motorcyclist than you are, than Spurg is, than I am, than our guest, Lance Oliver, is. We will discuss in detail. Also on the program, updates from EICMA and why does everybody pick on small motorcycles? All that and more, everybody, coming up after a word from our sponsor.
So in these Motul conversations, we talk a lot about changing your engine oil. But what about your gear oil? What if you're out there on a shaft drive motorcycle burning up the miles and you haven't checked out your gearbox lately? That final drive system, that needs some attention. Well, luckily, Motul has a full line of gear oil products to make sure that your bike is running tip-top all the time. Even if you don't have a chain, Motul's got you covered with their high-end gear oil. To learn more about how Motul can help you from grinding your gears, head over to RevZilla.com/Motul. That's RevZilla.com/MOTUL. And while you're over there on RevZilla.com, make sure you check out the RPM program. That's the Riders Preferred Membership Program, now only $39.99 a year. You get all kinds of discounts on motorcycle gear and apparel. You get $15 for just signing up, free 2-day shipping, concierge service, and it works across all of RevZilla's sister brands. That means J&P Cycles, Cycle Gear, RevZilla, and Rever. To learn more about all the benefits of the RPM program, head over to RevZilla.com/RPM. That's RevZilla.com/RPM. Now, on with the show.
All right, everybody. Welcome in again to Highside, Lowside. Spurjo, you just got back from a little bit of paternity leave, taking care of your little bear cub there. How's Mini Spurge doing?
He's doing great. The robots haven't taken over the household yet, like they might potentially be doing with this episode. If we learn that AI is actually smarter than us,
is AI a better parent? Is AI a better dad than you? Yeah, that's the question.
No, it's not, because AI is not getting puked on or pooped on like I have been in the last 3 weeks or so.
That's the research the world needs. Can robots get peed on and still love the child?
Oh my God. It was a nice 3-week hiatus to get to spend some time with him. But I am absolutely glad to be back, excited to be talking about whether or not a robot will take over our jobs in the future. And we'll go from there. But I think first and foremost, we like to kick off every episode with a little bit of a discussion of some things that are, maybe topical or maybe they're newsworthy, and we just kind of want to dive into some opinions on them. And over the last couple of weeks, we had EICMA, that's EICMA, which is a large motorcycle show out of Europe, where we had some interesting updates in the world of motorcycling and what to expect. And I guess before we start the timer, Zach,
yes,
you want to just give us a rundown of some of the headlines that we saw over on RevZilla's Common Tread last week?
Yes, indeed. So if you frequent Common Tread, you will have seen articles that covered updates from Yamaha, new MT-07 and 10R700, updates from Aprilia, everything from V4s to a Touareg Rally, updates from KTM, most notably a 1390 Super Duke GT. Very exciting. Also some relatively groundbreaking stuff. I mean, not groundbreaking, surprising, I would say, from Suzuki, which updated its very long in the tooth DRZ Dual Sport. Ducati has a new V2 platform for the Street Fighter V2 and Panigale V2. And there's a slew of other stuff as well, not least of which a V3 engine concept from Honda, some electric mumbo jumbo from CF Moto, and a BMW F450 GS, as well as an updated KTM 390 Adventure. Lots of cool stuff. Lots of cool stuff out of EICMA.
If for those of you that are maybe new to the world of motorcycling, you're not familiar with EICMA. EICMA takes place every year. It's an annual show in Milan, Italy. And we like it. We get excited about it. We report pretty heavily on it because it does kind of lead the trend for the year. It gives us an idea of what we're going to see from some manufacturers. There's always surprises throughout the year, but it does give us a good idea of, really what's the upcoming trend for 2025. And I think, Zach and I, followed along this year and we probably have some favorite things that we saw. Right. And I think now is when we're going to start the timer.
Yes.
As we get into the opinion side of this, which is, Zach, what was your favorite takeaway from EICMA?
Okay. I don't want to turn the tables too harshly here, but I'm going to need you to go first because my discussion is going to blow up into a whole thing. You'll see. I need your favorite first. What was it?
I liked the small adventure bikes. I liked the prototype of the BMW F450 GS. They're introducing a parallel twin.
Yes.
I think that kind of is the Versys X400 that we've been asking for from Kawasaki almost.
Sure.
And then you also saw to answer that, and that was just a prototype. You saw KTM introduce a new 390 Adventure, which my phone was getting blown up with from some friends who really are looking at like this new world of small adventure bikes as maybe that crossover between what a dual sport was and what an adventure bike is.
Right.
And so there seems to be a lot of interest in that segment because it could be beginner friendly, but also something that, advanced riders could enjoy as well.
And you got the CF Moto Ibex 450, which I think debuted last year, and we're still sort of waiting for homologated models to land in the US for us to try stateside. But yes, the 400 to 450 adventure class seems to be bubbling with some energy, which I agree is exciting. Spurgeon. Now, my favorite concept. You know what it is. Tell everybody what it was.
I really don't know. You made this comment earlier about how you were going to pick something that blew everybody else away, and
no, not blew everyone away. I just think it's going to be contentious.
My pick upset me. It was going to upset me.
My pick was the Honda V3. That is a 3-cylinder V formation engine. And Spurgeon, can you tell the ladies and gentlemen what the main feature of this Honda prototype engine is? It is a turbocharger.
Fear that this is going to be I was going to say, I fear like this is going to lead into a Turbo Bruce discussion.
Honda has a turbo.
Were already sending me this. People were already sending me this on Instagram being like, it looks like Turbo Bruce 1.
Yeah.
And these are people I don't know. They're like-minded motorcyclists that obviously listen to the podcast and they follow me on Instagram. But I was not excited to see that because it's not a discussion that I want to, open up again. It's a chapter of my life I'd like to leave behind me.
Well, for those who don't know what we're talking about, Honda debuted or pulled the sheet off this V3 triple with an electric turbocharger on it. So unlike classic turbochargers, which rely on exhaust gases flowing to spool up a turbo and then force more air into the intake side of the engine, this is an electric turbocharger or electric supercharger sort of that spins independently of the engine and can provide more provide unnatural amount of air into the intake side of the engine than a normal engine would, and it's completely independently controlled with electronics.
So timer's going off. What I will say is that take the turbo aside, I really like this because it's an incredibly interesting new engine from Honda.
Yes, agreed.
Like a V3, typically for those of you listening that aren't familiar, we see 3 cylinders in Triumphs and Yamahas now primarily. MV Agusta makes a triple, but they're inline triples.
Yes.
So really what we're seeing from Honda is 2 cylinders in the front, 1 cylinder out back. And it's a completely, I've never seen this configuration before. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's super interesting.
It's got a little whiff of the 2002 Honda MotoGP bike when that first came out, the RC 211, which was a V5, 3 cylinders in the front, 2 in the back, I believe. So yeah, it's got little whiffs of HRC in there, and it's very interesting. To be clear, and in Spurgeon's defense, Turbo Bruce does not win anything. This isn't a bike that's coming to market. It's just a prototype. It's just an idea that Honda threw out there. But I have to say, I'm quite tickled at the idea of a 3-cylinder electronically supercharged engine. That'd be cool.
Okay, so the timer's gone off. I know. We have to get Lance on here. We have a fight to win with robot technology before it takes over the world.
Indeed.
But I will say the one little footnote here that I don't think really got enough attention is KTM introduced a new GT, a new Super Duke GT, but in one of the captions of the photos on the article we ran, the valve check service interval has doubled over the previous model. You can now run that engine almost, it's over 37,000 miles before having a valve check. And that is incredible for people that talk about service intervals and maintenance schedules and all these things. I mean, I don't know, when I started riding, Ducatis were every 7,500. My little Bonneville, it's every 12,000. You've seen these intervals jump, but to look at a service interval of a valve check every 37,000 miles, I think is really kind of foreshadowing where the industry is going from a reliability standpoint. I've
got a 2024 BMW R12 9T out front of the office right now that I rode to work today. Valve checks every 6,000 miles. So, you know, it's not every luxury Euro brand that's doing this, you know? And that deserves a tip of the cap. You're right, Spurge. That's a good call out. I like it.
So, okay. Anyway, plenty of content for you to read over on Common Tread. You can go to RevZilla.com/common-tread, and you can read all of the different articles that we covered from EICMA and all the new motorcycles released. And speaking of Common Tread, Lance Oliver is the managing editor of Common Tread. He is going to be our guest for the discussion today. Zach, let's, before we get him on here, just give the audience a little bit of a rundown as to what they're going to expect in this episode with Lance.
Right. So the idea here was to ask AI some motorcycling questions and see what we get and see if the questions are answered accurately. And just sort of, we feel like we have enough motorcycling knowledge between the two or three of us that we would be able to, sort of at least anecdotally and in a cultural way, fact check, the ChatGPT robot and whether or not it's correct in answering these questions. So the idea here is we're going to ask a question we're going to put a question forward. We're going to give quick answers. Then we're going to read the ChatGPT answer, and then we'll sort of chew it over and see if AI has answered the question correctly from our point of view. One note we'd like to make is that this is ChatGPT 4.0 that we'll be using, which was released in May of this year. So it's a few months since its debut. As far as we can tell, this is the approximate state of the art for AI. So maybe it's not the bleeding edge, but it is a good baseline.
For those of you that perhaps have been living under a rock for the last 3 to 4 years, AI is artificial intelligence.
You missed out on some stock, let me tell you.
Yeah. Your 401k is worse off for wear. But I think that's a good indicator of what we're doing here. We are playing against the leading artificial intelligence technology that's storming the world.
And if there were ever an organic intelligence to face off against the world's most powerful robot, it is Lance the Silver Fox Oliver. So let's get him in here and start this off.
Lance Oliver, welcome back to the podcast. It is good to have you here as Zach and I join forces with you to take on the robots in a game of wit.
Well, let's hope we're equally equipped.
No, I mean, Zack is what you didn't realize before you came on. Zack pretty much set you up for our audience as like the defender of all organic intelligence left in the world.
Yes, it's true. I mean, you are a bastion of motorcycle knowledge, Lance, and you're anything but artificial. So
I'm glad that there's no pressure.
Well, you can always blame it on us if things go sideways here. So
I only have to defend all life forms on Earth. No, nothing hanging in the balance there.
That's right. So the way this is going to work, Lance, and we already gave the audience a little bit of a explanation here. We have a question. We each have a question in front of us, and we're going to go through 10 different questions, and then we'll have maybe some special lightning round ones at the end. We'll each give our off the cuff answer. And then we're going to check and see what ChatGPT had to say, and then we will dive into the discussion. So let's just go ahead and try one of these right away.
I like it.
And we'll adjust if we have to. But keeping things snappy, Lance, guest honors. Our first question right out of the gate, are Chinese motorcycles good, and why?
See, I know we're here to talk about AI, but I think 50% of the problem is the question, not just the answer, because I know from looking at search engine traffic that this is exactly the kind of question that people ask. But the problem with it is it's so general and broad that, okay, the honest answer to that question, yes, some of them. And the honest answer to that question, yes, some of them aren't. And in general, they're getting better. But the problem is if you're the person who went out and bought the piece of junk from a company that provides no consumer after the sale support, and it's broken down and there's no way to get parts for it and no one knows how to fix it, it really doesn't do you any good to know that in general, Chinese motorcycles are getting better, or that some of the ones you didn't buy are actually pretty good. So that's the problem, I think, starts with the question, but that's my answer.
But I think that's a great point, is the fact that what we tried to do with producer Chase at the helm was type in questions that we felt were being asked. And
Yes.
the reason that you are here is that, you've written a couple different articles at this point around the dangers of turning to the internet for advice. Because if you're asking a question, you might be getting a response, but it's not exactly the response that you think you asked for.
Well, it's a response from somebody who most likely knows absolutely nothing about you too. So
there you go. So it's a flawed system. I mean, we could end
You're
the
not
podcast
exactly making
right
a case
there.
for organic intelligence here, Lance. Anyway, Spurge, let's. What's your answer to, are Chinese motorcycles good?
I think they're getting better. I don't think.
But
in
aren't
general,
European motorcycles also getting better, or are they getting worse?
I think they're all getting better. I think all motorcycles are getting better.
Okay.
I think I would have an easier time finding a dependable Chinese motorcycle today than I would have 5 years ago. But to Lance's point, I don't think that's a universal statement. I think you have to know which brands to consider and to look at.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
What about yourself, Zachary?
Okay. So you guys are right, of course, that this is dependent on a bunch of variables that are not included in the question itself. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say, no, Chinese motorcycles are not good. And of course, that's like too general to really be a solid answer, because there's so much more nuance to it than just that. But I guess if it was really holding my feet to the fire and someone said, I am not going to tell you who I am, what I'm doing, how much money I have, or any information, and I'm going to buy it. I can either buy a motorcycle from China, or I can buy a motorcycle from Japan or Europe or something like that. What should I do? I would, if I have to answer it in a binary way, I'm going to say, don't do it. That's my, I'm oversimplifying it. I know, but that's
I think that's a really good point. Let me ask you this. I'll put this question kind of back in a different way, right at both of you. If I gave you $10,000 right now, and you could each spend, a $10,000 newer used motorcycle, you have 10 grand to spend. Would either of you start your search with any of the current Chinese motorcycles out there?
Lance, guest honors.
Nothing current. I mean, it's just nothing that particularly meets, my preferences. Now, I will point out, in response to what Zack said, that, those guys really praised the, I hope I'm not getting it wrong, the CF Moto 450 SS, I believe, saying it was a really, really good bike. Again, I think you can't answer the question. I applaud Zack for trying to give the yes or no answer, but I'm going to refuse to cooperate in that nice and tidy approach.
Yes, indeed. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Well,
Zack, 10 grand.
Oh, okay. No, I'm the one that said no, right? I'm the one that said no, I would not recommend it. And I stand by that. No, if I had 10 grand, I wouldn't spend it on.
See, I think it's hard, because I've ridden bikes. Let's stop there, because this is what I do. This is what Zach and I didn't want to happen, was that we didn't want the discussion to start now. Let's go to AI for the answer, and then we will digest this a little bit further. So the first answer from AI is that Chinese motorcycles have improved significantly in quality over the years, and there are now a variety of options available that cater to different needs and budgets. Whether they're quote unquote good depends on what you're looking for in a motorcycle. I think that's the whole answer. Yeah, right. Okay. I mean, whether they're good depends on what you're looking for in a motorcycle. That's basically what AI said, and that they have improved over the years, which is exactly what Lance and Spurge said. So AI also had some pros and cons. Do we want to at least read some of the pros and cons? Yes, I think so. Yeah. We can list those. So very left side would be the pros. That's affordability, variety, fuel efficiency, and improved quality. However, at the same time, on the cons is build quality, parts availability, resale value, and aftermarket support. So it sounds like improve quality on a pro, but build quality on a con. There still might be some disagreement there with the machines.
Yes, a little dissonance. That's true. Yeah. So you guys are both looking at the same list of pros and cons. Do you have any bones to pick with AI's answer here, Lance? Are you looking at anything that you think like, that's stretching it? I don't think that's not advice I would give or anything like that.
I mean, again, it gets to be kind of general in that sense. And it's a whole lot easier to answer a question if you say, well, this specific model of Chinese motorcycle, or at very least this specific brand, is it, that makes it a whole lot easier. But to say, I mean, we're talking about the biggest population on Earth, and we're talking about a vast array of different manufacturers.
Okay.
So it's,
let me jump in here. One of the pros that AI listed was variety, and said specifically there's a wide range of models available in motorcycles from China, from small scooters to dirt bikes, cruisers, and even sport bikes. That's what AI said. I don't think that is a pro. I don't think there's more variety in Chinese. Sure, there's more than there maybe has been in the past, but there are massive gaps in. If you said like I want to outfit a whole garage of 5 motorcycles, I want to get lots of different stuff.
No, because I think you're not. I think you're thinking about the U.S. market and what bikes have been brought into here. And maybe that's how we have to narrow the question down.
Okay, so I want a 1,000cc sport bike from China. What do I get?
Well, there's that new Goldwing.
So
I don't know.
Or a 600cc sport bike from China. There's one in the works. They're talking about CF Motor's talking about that 675 triple situation, which is sort of a kind of a thing, right? Okay. So there's like, in my mind, there's some pretty big holes in the variety.
Yeah, I don't think they're a leader, and I think the other piece of this too is they're not necessarily a leader in innovation. It seems like they're more of a follower down established paths. And I think the example that I was going to use earlier is that what we're seeing with some of these Chinese firms now, and this speaks to improved quality. You have companies that are turning to Chinese manufacturers to produce certain motorcycles in their range. You know, there was KTM went to China for production for the 790. BMW had gone to China for production for the F850 and I think now the 900 GS.
Right. Or 900 engines and 850 engines in general.
I think the manufacturing is happening back in Germany. But my point is that I think there is some diversity there in collaborations with Chinese firms, but I don't see China necessarily leading the charge in innovation and coming up with net new at this point in time.
And I think that's the reason we're not seeing 1,000cc sport bikes from China, right? Is that's not a market that anyone sees as like a burgeoning place where there's lots of, fresh faces and money to be made, right? It's sort of like the manufacturers that are still doing that are kind of stuck in because that's what maybe that's a separate podcast. Anyway, that's I think that's a good point, and I think that's fair. And I think we're just at the cusp right now. I think of seeing Chinese firms do their own thing with motorcycling rather than just knockoff models or engines or types of motorcycle. We're actually seeing some innovation, which I think is interesting, if nothing else.
To kind of pivot to, because like part of the intention for this episode of the podcast was, if you are someone that is just going to AI and you're going to Google or wherever and you're just typing in "are Chinese motorcycles good?" There is some discrepancy here, like fuel efficiency. The answer under fuel efficiency as a pro was many Chinese motorcycles, especially smaller displacement models, are known for excellent fuel economy. Is that any different than a small Honda or Suzuki or Kawasaki? No, it's not.
Of course not. It's ridiculous.
But that's my point, is that I think it's hard unless you have that context to understand that, like, well, it might be a pro, but it's not a pro that's different from any other small displacement motorcycle in production.
Right. So you're finding a hole in AI's answer. Say it, Spurgeon. The robot's listening. You got to say it to their face, man.
I hope that that this just gives me at least job security for another 5 or 6 years until AI catches up. But
okay, well.
What about some of the cons? Like,
yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to bring up, and I was going to ask Lance if you see any holes in the cons there. Like build quality. I think we talked about that a little bit. I think that's probably pretty fair to point out that there are questions around that. Resale value. I think that's also pretty fair.
Well, those were the two that I thought were really interesting. Resale value, I thought, was a really smart response. I will give AI credit in the fact that like it was able to determine and give an answer that I genuinely do agree with. Like part of the issue that we're seeing here is that the Chinese motorcycles in the U.S. market, I can't speak to other countries, do not hold their value as well as established brands.
Yeah, that's definitely true. What about parts availability? Lance, do you think that's a fair critique of Chinese motorcycle companies in general?
Well, yes,
or even specifically.
I mean, in general, yes. In some cases, obviously more than others, and I think that I think the cons in this case are pretty much spot on. I don't really see anything there that I would quibble with.
Yeah. I'm gonna call bullshit for 1 second to all three of us. No, seriously, because
do it.
Like, as far as parts availability goes, Lance, like, have you reached out to a Chinese motorcycle dealer and said, "Hey, I have a broken, connecting rod in my engine. Can I get one, please?" Like,
so
no.
Go ahead, Lance. I have an answer as well, but you go first.
No, I haven't. But the structure in the United States for a lot of these brands is not the same as the structure we're used to dealing with for the more established Japanese, European, and American brands. So the mere fact that it's harder to find somebody who could even get you that part, even if it's perfectly readily available in some stage in the supply chain, you still have to find the right person who's going to get it for you. And some of these newer brands, just simply because they're newer, not necessarily because they're Chinese, but just simply because they're newer, they don't have that infrastructure set up yet.
Yeah. And I think that that's one place where I would raise a hand and say that there are Chinese brands that are doing that very intentionally and are getting much, much better. I have asked for replacement parts for CF Moto, for example, and they arrived pretty fast. And I didn't have a huge complaints about it. And I've asked for replacement parts for European bikes and waited forever to get anything. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that, I think that it's definitely true. I have heard stories about people buying, certain Chinese bikes they're more like distributed by small companies in the United States, and they just sort of like they give you the bike in a crate, but there's really no factory support. There's not a lot going on there, and those you can really be up a creek if you break something important and you need it because they don't have parts. But the bigger brands that are moving in and taking the U.S. market seriously are doing things right, I think, or they're at least trying to.
Yeah, and I think that's the big differentiator, right? Because like I was thinking back to like when we did the article on the CSC, the San Gabriel 250.
Yes,
like their business model intentionally is that they don't have a dealership network. But if you reach out to them, they have a warehouse in Southern California, and they ship you. You can put in a request, and they'll ship you whatever part that you're looking for. But you can't just go down to your local dealership and say, "Hey, I need an XYZ for my CSC." They're not going to have it. So you have you have to know how to acquire that. It might not be as easy as, going down to your local Honda dealership.
And you also have to know which part you need, which a lot of people aren't necessarily going to have the expertise to say what's wrong with their motorcycle if it's not running.
Yeah, right. That's true. Okay. So this was a fun discussion, but we got other questions we want to answer. I would like to finish off this discussion with a very short request from the two of you. Lance, I'm afraid you have to go first. Give a letter grade to this AI answer. What letter grade do you give this AI answer?
I don't know, B-.
Okay, I like that. I was going to say B+, and I feel like I was pretty critical of it. So maybe I should have put mine down to B-. What about you, Spurge?
Well, I was going to say C+. But
okay, wow. So I gave it the highest grade in the.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And again, if you were just looking at the one sentence, Chinese motorcycles have improved significantly in quality over the years, and they are now a variety of options available that cater to different needs and budgets. Whether they're good depends on what you're looking for in a motorcycle. Like, That's just a generic answer. It's not that it's wrong, but it's just like, it's so generic that it doesn't answer and it doesn't help anybody. If you're out there trying to find a motorcycle, that answer doesn't actually help you.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the list of pros and cons that ChatGPT provided was, in general, we thought was, we picked it apart a little bit, but like we agreed that the structure was pretty good, right?
If I was grading this as a high school history teacher and this was a question that I asked one of my students, I would give it a C+. I would give it a C+.
Okay.
C+ answer.
Well,
I was notoriously a difficult teacher, though. So.
I bet you were. Okay. We're moving on.
Take the second one for us, Zach.
Yes. Question number 2 here. What is the best beginner motorcycle and why? What is the best beginner motorcycle and why? I would reiterate, we're going for concise answers to begin with before we get AI's take on this. So Lance, as quickly as possible, what is the best beginner motorcycle? It can be more than one.
No, well, see, that's the thing. My answer is something light, something used, and something appropriate to your size. And that's not what it doesn't. The question doesn't say name a model of motorcycle.
Okay. Then I'm restating the question. Give me 3 makes and models that would constitute
that's not the question.
Excellent beginner motorcycles.
Okay. If you are short and like a cruiser, a Honda Rebel 500. If you're tall and want to particularly try riding off road, maybe a Kawasaki KLX 300. And if you really, really don't want to learn how to use a clutch, get a scooter.
Pretty good for organic intelligence. Spurge, what's your answer?
I'm going to try and keep mine more concise. Like best beginner motorcycle. If I had to pick one answer without going scooters and clutchless, like the question is, if you're looking for a beginner motorcycle, Z400, Kawasaki Z400, upright seating position, do a little bit of anything on it. Like you could take it a little bit more sporty if you wanted to. You could take it around town. Like I just think that's a great platform. And yes, Lance, we could sit here and say the KLX 300 or the CRF 300L for dual sports and all that other jazz, but like just generic answer, Z400 from Kawasaki.
Wow. You guys covered a lot of bases. I don't really know what I'm going to say now. I'm gonna say Suzuki SV650. It's a little big, it's a little heavy, bigger. It's a little powerful. Yeah, I went a little bigger. But same reason. You can grow into it also. You don't need to sell it as quickly. You can SV650 is a great bike for any rider level, not just a beginner. So that's my rationale there. So I think
I feel like I get trapped in this conversation a lot, but let's see what AI says and then we'll jive in and we'll discuss.
Okay. So the answer for question number 2, what is the best beginner motorcycle from ChatGPT is the best beginner motorcycle depends on a few factors. Big surprise. Lance, he called it again. Like your experience level, intended use, and physical size. But generally, a good beginner bike should be lightweight, easy to handle, have manageable power. Here are some of the top beginner-friendly motorcycles that strike a balance between ease of use, fun, and practicality. So, to AI's credit, it produced some model names as well. Spurge, what are you seeing?
So, just a quick rundown of the model names would be Honda's CB500F, Kawasaki's Ninja 400, the Yamaha R3, which is their little entry-level sport bike, the Suzuki V-Strom 250, which I don't think we have that in America.
I don't think we do, no, but maybe it's good.
The Honda CRF 300L, which is the dual sport that we just mentioned, the Royal Enfield Meteor 650 or Meteor 350, which is the little cruiser, the KTM 390 Duke, which is KTM's naked sport bike, and the Harley-Davidson Street 500, which I don't think exists anymore either. I think that bike is
that's not in production anymore, but you could maybe find one. Yep. Okay, well,
so manageable power. Go ahead.
Yeah. So AI's answer was basically, it depends what you want, but there are lots of options, which is fine. And then it provided some options, which I appreciate. And I do not think that AI's answer was as good as Lance's, personally.
I don't think it was as good as Lance's, but I also don't think it was. I don't think there's nothing on this list which I found egregious. Right? Like
really? Have you ridden a Harley-Davidson Street 500?
Well, that bike doesn't exist anymore, so that's not real. So
okay. Well,
I think this is information that's being used one.
Yeah, exactly. You can find one on Craigslist or something.
Nothing says that these have to be new.
Outside of the fact that the Harley-Davidson Street 500 was arguably just a really bad motorcycle. Let's pretend that one's not on the list. I think the rest of these bikes are all bikes that I would recommend as solid beginner bikes.
This is the notoriously difficult teacher here being like, well, that answer, we'll just let that one slide because you didn't know what you were talking about. You didn't mean that one.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I did not take into account the fact that bike is horrible.
It is horrible.
But I think in general, like if you gave minus that bike, like this is a good list of beginner bikes. And I think it's in the same spirit as what Lance was trying to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
no,
certainly.
Lance, you disagree?
Certainly.
I would say I don't think of that list. The only ones that I would quibble with is I agree with Zack. The Harley-Davidson 500 is a terrible choice. The other one I might quibble with is the Royal Enfield, simply because I think you could go with a Honda Rebel, which would be lighter and give you the similar kind of, if you want a cruiser, I think that would be probably a better choice. But I don't think any of the others are bad choices at all.
Yeah, but I think the Meteor 350 is something that's probably a little bit more, I don't know, like the Rebel, the Rebel 300 is a bike that is almost arguably not cruiser enough for somebody that wants a little beginner cruiser. Mm-hmm. I think there's something about that Royal Enfield that probably speaks a little bit more towards feeling a bit more organic in a cruiser sense, I guess, than the Rebel does. Personally.
I think that, if you're after classic looks, a Royal Enfield Meteor 350 is just so handsome and much more kind of like classic than a Honda Rebel 300, which is sort of like a quasi. In fact, I think they call them neo classics. They're sort of like, it's got a round headlight and stuff, but it's like, it's liquid cooled and it's like it's not trying very hard to look retro or classic. Whereas the Royal Enfield is like I think truly appealing classic motorcycle. However, AI said the Meteor 350 is, quote, easy to handle. And I don't know if I'd agree with that. It's a pleasant little bike. I like that bike a lot. I think it's great, but it's got to weigh 100 pounds more than a Rebel 300. Does anybody know off the top of their head?
Yeah, but it wasn't difficult to handle. Like it might be difficult to pick up, as you saw.
It says you weigh 220 pounds and you've been riding your whole life.
I don't know. It didn't feel difficult to handle. But maybe you're right. Maybe I am looking at it from a different standpoint. But I guess that goes back to, the point that I was going to make about your pick discussing the SV650 before we asked AI for their answer was I think this gets into the nuance of this question. Like where we have struggled with the internet before, and Lance, you've written articles about this, is when you get into people saying that you can go buy a inline 4 600cc liquid cooled sport bike as your first motorcycle and it's going to be great because you can grow into it. That's simply just not a good answer. Like that's not a good beginner bike. I think your pick of an SV650 arguably is on the fringe of that. And I say that because it's something that I've been guilty of as well. Like my first bike was the Bonneville and I liked it because I still have it. I grew into it. I kept it. I made it a lot of different things. It's a bike that I've recommended a Triumph Street Twin 900 as a first bike to people if they're larger, if they maybe have ridden dirt bikes as kids. Like there's some nuance here that AI simply isn't going to provide. They're looking at displacement size and they're saying these are beginner bikes. And there's probably something in the marketing language of each of these motorcycles. If you go to the OEM's page where they're talking about being beginner friendly, whereas if you're asking someone like Zack or Lance or myself, you might get a more nuanced answer with a bike that might not traditionally be thought of as a beginner bike, but it's something we might recommend to you as a beginner bike.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
There's a lot of nuance. And to AI's credit, we're sort of like, we're painting with broad strokes here, and that makes it hard.
Right.
So,
I mean, we did an article, Common Trend, some time ago about asking our different people on our staff, our different writers, what they thought was the best beginner bike. And we tried to provide some of that nuance and saying, well, if you're this kind of rider, maybe this, and if you're that kind of rider, maybe that. And we tried to give different options that way. And that's something that AI can't do because you've got an anonymous person typing in a question on a computer. Hopefully, those of us motorcyclists out there in the wild, when someone comes up to us, we can at very least look at them and say, well, this guy's 6'6", he doesn't really want to be on a Rebel 300, or something like that. Whereas AI obviously can't do that.
Well, it gets back to the way that these questions are being asked, correct? Like we typed in, what's the best beginner motorcycle, which we feel like it's a generic question that there's probably people out there asking.
Exactly.
But if we typed in, and when we haven't done this, so, I'm speaking out of turn a little bit here, but like, what if we would type in like, what's the best beginner bike for somebody that weighs 270 pounds and is 6'7"? Are we going to get a more nuanced response from AI? Or are we going to get the same, list in response? And we don't have the answer to that.
I would assume that it would make some adjustments. I was going to say, like, final question here, if you're looking at this list, aside from the Harley-Davidson Street 500, how do you feel about AI's answer? Like, the best beginner motorcycle depends on a few factors like your experience level, intended use, and physical size. But generally, a good beginner bike should be lightweight, easy to handle, and have manageable power. So one thing that I think is funny about this answer is that, AI is creating these answers based on scraping the internet for information and then amalgamating it and digesting it and regurgitating it. Right. So it's interesting to me that the upshot from this is AI saying, well, the power should be manageable. It should have manageable power. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah,
that's something that motorcycle experts such as ourselves have said time and time again over the years, right? Well, if you want a beginner motorcycle, it should have manageable power. It should be manageable. Well, that also depends. I mean, that's a totally subjective thing to say, right? And I think that it's funny to me to see reflections of generic subjective advice that have been given from people to other people being regurgitated and said again from a robot. Because when I look at this answer, I think, well, what do you know? What's manageable power? ChatGPT, explain that to me. Do you have any basis for what manageable means? Because that's not something that people are going to know. Really?
Well, maybe that's the theme that we're already seeing with some of these answers, right? Like maybe the theme here is that it can only spit back out what it's learning from what it can read, and
right.
And it's trying. Right. I think some of the rules in the equation, just two answers in, is that it seems to be focused more on generalities than it does definitive. This is what's right for you.
Well, I'm focused on specifics, and you should not buy a Harley-Davidson Street 500. You should buy a Kawasaki Ninja 400. Those are both answers that came from ChatGPT here. So to be specific, let's give a letter grade again on the answer. What do we think?
And again, Lance, just for your reminder here, the bikes that it gave out as a list after that little spewing generality was Honda's CB500F, which is like a naked upright sport bike. The Ninja 400, which is Kawasaki's small displacement sport bike. Yamaha's R3, the Suzuki V-Strom 250, which we don't have here, but it's a small adventure bike. Honda's CRF 300L, which is a small dual sport bike. Royal Enfield Meteor 350 small cruiser. KTM Duke 390, small naked sport bike. And of course, the Harley-Davidson Street 500, which we can just throw off the list. Nobody should be looking at that bike. Lance, letter grade.
I'll give it a B.
That's what I was going to say.
I was going to give it an A-.
Interesting.
I was going higher.
You got a little
time.
soft spot for that Street 500, I think.
I do not.
That's what I think.
I think this is like, there's nothing on this list that like, if you gave this to a random stranger, regardless of their size, regardless of their knowledge, that none of these bikes are going to get them in trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
And to be clear, the Harley-Davidson Street 500 is not like too fast or outrageously tall or anything like that. It's just when you hit the brakes, you don't stop, and it looks like it was welded by someone's dog. So
yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. It's not that that's a terrible bike for a beginner. It's just not a good bike in general.
Correct. Yeah.
The thing is, a beginning rider wouldn't know that until they bought their second bike
Yeah.
And then they'd wonder, wait, this feels really different. I wonder why,
Right. Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
All right. Well, that being said, so far it seems like ChatGPT was a little bit better at answering the second question than the first question. So let's now move on to the third. Speaking of the Harley-Davidson Street 500.
That's right.
Question number 3, who makes better motorcycles, Indian or Harley-Davidson? The two leading United States motorcycle manufacturers. Who makes better motorcycles, Indian or Harley-Davidson? Lance Oliver, guest honors.
This is hard. This is like, I'm very curious to see what AI has to say about this, but continue.
Neither. I mean, they both make good motorcycles, and I don't, I'm not going to say that one entire lineup is better than one other entire lineup. You know what I mean? There might be individual models that I prefer this one over that, but
Sure.
Flip a coin.
Okay. That's a good answer. Spurge?
I think that, historically speaking, both brands have had their faux pas. I think what Polaris has done with Indian over the last decade is nothing short of impressive. And I think at the same time, what Harley-Davidson has done with the quality of their motorcycles, in the last decade is nothing short of amazing. I think that they're both innovating probably a lot more than we often give them credit for as far as reliability and dependability goes. So I would say that they're probably on the same page as far as, where they're falling from a which one's better standpoint.
Right. Who makes better motorcycles, Indian or Harley-Davidson?
Maybe from a resale value standpoint, Harley-Davidson?
Probably Harley, yeah. So I think the coin flip is a totally fair answer. Like, I guess I would add a little bit of color to what Lance said by saying, like, when I think of the difference between the two, when I think Indian, I think like you're going to get the classic American look and feel, but it's going to be much more kind of like, I don't know, advanced, a little bit more tech heavy, a little bit less afraid of the future. Whereas Harley-Davidson, you're going to get truly classic American style and feel, sometimes to a fault, but also sometimes to great acclaim. And that's how the two kind of sit in my mind. And I can't say that I can pick one. So I think it sounds like none of us can really pick, but that's my little bit of color to Lance's coin flip.
That might be the answer here. So
okay, let's see what
the
AI
answer.
has to say.
The answer from AI is ultimately the quote unquote better motorcycle is subjective and depends on what you prioritize in a motorcycle. Both brands make fantastic motorcycles. Indian leans towards the modern, refined, and luxurious side, while Harley-Davidson embodies a classic, customizable, and rugged American heritage side. Here's a direct comparison of key areas to help you choose. Areas where AI listed Indian as the winner was performance, comfort, and technology. Areas where Harley-Davidson was listed as a winner was customization, price/value, and resale value.
Okay.
I don't think I would have put Harley-Davidson as like price/value.
Yeah.
But I guess it's comparing it to Indian, where it says Indian motorcycles are often priced at a premium. Harley-Davidsons are generally priced competitively.
That seems like the PR team over at Harley did good work, because I don't think that Harleys are famously affordable or anything like that. I mean, they're both expensive brands realistically, right? Like, but I would say Indian has more bikes that lean down toward sort of like affordability, right?
I just wrote an article about this on Common Thread.
Did you? I missed it.
No, it's being published tomorrow. That's
okay.
as we are recording this. Zack has not seen the article yet, but it'll be in the history by the time everybody listens to this. So, actually, I think the affordability that's 100% wrong, because Harley-Davidson has made no question of the fact that they're going up market, that they are focusing on their sales of their touring bikes. They're more expensive models. They only have 3 bikes in their, what they call their sport line, which is the 2 Nightster models and the Sportster S.
Right.
All of those are now $13,000, $14,000 to start. Whereas I just wrote an article about Indian announcing some more of their lineup for 2025. They now have 14 variations of the Scout model. They have
and the Scout, so everyone knows, the Scout is
their entry
the smallest.
level.
Yeah, right.
Yes. So
they have still a
5,
big engine, but the smallest one, yeah.
They have 5 versions of the Scout, which is 1250cc. And then they have another 3 versions of the Scout 60,
right,
which is the smaller engine and less expensive. And then because of additional trim levels in that, if you add it all up, they have 14 different choices, all of which are equal to or less than the lowest price Harley-Davidsons. So, the least expensive one is $9,999. Whereas
that's the cheapest new Indian you can buy in 2024.
New Indian you can buy in 2025. So, which is a few $1,000s less than the cheapest Harley you can buy. So you not only can you get into an Indian much less expensively, but you have far more options to do so. So to me, that's 100% incorrect.
If you look at these, it definitely seems like the answers are just being pulled from some generic copy
brochure
somewhere that I found on the internet. Yeah.
Well, and this is information that's been, provided somewhere at some point, or someone's written this opinion perhaps. So it's.
Well, I would just add that, if, ChatGPT is giving the nod on comfort to, Indian, it has never ridden a bobber with 2 inches of rear suspension travel.
Well, that was the one that I was going to pick out. I know that, and again, it's hard because it's giving just general
There's
responses
plenty of
here.
comfortable Indian models out there, yes, but it's not all of them.
But if you look at the actual breakdown under comfort and why it gave it to Indian, it says, Harley's bikes are generally very comfortable with comfort features like advanced seat and ergonomics. However, Harley's suspension systems can be a bit stiffer or less refined, whereas Indian generally offers a more modern and plush suspension system which offers a smoother ride. And I don't know if I agree with that. But anyway.
I think I agree with that. I mean, I don't know. Like when I think about the Harleys and Indians that I've ridden, I've often felt like in 2 bikes in the same class, the Indian, I've thought like, it doesn't necessarily have more suspension travel, or maybe it does. Maybe it has a half inch more, and you think like, well, that probably helped a little bit, but it was also just felt like it was a little bit, I don't know, it's done a little bit better. So I would agree with AI on this one, but it sounds like you wouldn't, Spurge. I know you've had some Indian rides where you've been pretty uncomfortable. So.
Yeah, but I've also been very, limited into the top tier of Indians range, where I have spent more time with Harley-Davidson in the top tier of their range. And, I've been impressed with the comfort. Now, I'm not going to say that it's the most sporting, performance-oriented handling that I've ever seen, but from a comfort standpoint, I could hop on a stock Road King and take off and feel like, again, trying to be very objective here. I'm not saying it's the right fit for my preferred ergonomic style, but from a comfort of how the bike rode, I didn't, I don't really have any qualms with how Harley-Davidson does their thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But then, I remember a conversation with Patrick Garvin where Patrick Garvin has said upgrading Harley-Davidson suspensions is, something he often recommends. So
who
knows?
Yeah. I mean, in both cases, I think, generally, but I don't know. I would agree with AI there. The price thing that we already discussed, I think is the biggest standout for me. I think in other, we should give AI some credit here. It's like, it's marked down maybe some obvious things, but I think clearly correct, which is that Harley-Davidson wins when it comes to customization and resale value. Those are things that Harley has just it's always been a big part of Harley-Davidson culture. And for some reason, resale value has always been high, and that's absolutely true. And I can't say that I've noticed that Indian resale value is poor, but Harley-Davidson resale value is among the best in all of motorcycling, right? I can't think of another.
I like the customization one too, because I can't think, I would be hard pressed to find a bike that is as easily customizable, at least in the American market, as a Harley-Davidson.
I would agree.
Let me ask you guys what you think about this one, the technology answer. It says that Indian's been more aggressive in integrating modern technology, and it mentions advanced infotainment system, Bluetooth connectivity, and adjustable ride control. Harley has been slower to embrace some of the newer tech. Do you feel that's accurate?
I would have to go back and see when Harley-Davidson started integrating some of their tech, but I remember using plug-in phone infotainment centers in Harley-Davidson years ago.
But they have all that stuff now.
That's what
they do.
But I know, but they've had it for years is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I don't think, like, when I saw the technology thing, I thought what AI was going to say was like liquid cooling, for example, which like Indian has embraced, and they have a performance, bagger or performance cruiser, and it just has a liquid cooled engine that is a much more modern, performance oriented style of engine. And did you miss out on some of the style of fins on the cylinders and that kind of thing? Sure, maybe, but that is undeniably more advanced in my mind. And while the internals of Harley's engines are ultimately, many of them liquid cooled, and there's lots of technology in there to make the engines modern, they are, in my opinion, still reaching for an antiquated look and feel that holds them back in a way that Indian is not. So I thought that's what AI was going to cite, and not so much the electronic gizmos, which I don't think Harley-Davidson's really behind. I would agree with you, Lance.
Yeah, I just don't get the feeling that there's any real differentiation there between the brands as a rule.
Well, so what I'm seeing here is it gave 6 parameters here and sort of said, Indian wins in these 3 categories, Harley wins in these 3 categories. And it seems like we've picked one from each of those. So 30% of each answer was incorrect. Basically, right? Do we agree there that we're sort of like, we've picked apart no less than 33% of what AI has said here.
So what grade do you want to give it?
Well, I think that you got to go, the best it can do is a C at that point, right? I would say it's a passing grade, but
yeah,
C minus?
Give it a C?
I was going to say a C minus.
Okay, C minus. So I would like to call out one more thing here, which is that I often ride Indians and think, man, Indian has done such a good job making this motorcycle feel comfortable and fast, and the brakes feel good. And I just feel like it's a better package sometimes than the opposing Harley-Davidson. But I've also historically ridden Harley-Davidsons and thought, I don't care that it's not as good as something else. I just like it for what it is. I don't want it to be the best bike. I want it to be the most Harley-Davidson that it can be, because that's what's important. I remember riding what was it called? It was called the 48. It was called a Sportster. It was the 1200 Sportster. It was called, I think it was called the Harley 48, right?
Yeah.
It was a Sportster model. This is called the 48.
Yeah.
And I remember riding that bike, and it's got a tiny little gas tank. It's got no fuel range. The rear suspension is like a golf cart. It's terrible. And I remember riding around on it and thinking, I love this. I just love it. I love the sound that it makes when you accelerate away from a stoplight. I like how it shakes and rumbles. It sounds like a Harley-Davidson is supposed to sound. It feels like a Harley-Davidson is supposed to feel. In my mind, I was really caught up in that aspect of it. And I think that that's something that artificial intelligence maybe will always struggle to answer, is someone just sort of having that calling, right? And that feeling, which I think is important to call out in the context of these bikes.
I think it's a great point. And it speaks to, despite the fact that, AI is giving some decent answers in some regards, it might be missing a little bit of that nuance. Mm-hmm. So Zach, I'm going to let you take question 4. We are going to answer this question, but first let's get a word from our sponsor, Motul, and then we will come back with, what's the hardest skill to learn when riding a motorcycle?
All right, we are back with more questions for AI and OI. I would just like to say, during the break, I looked up the weight difference between a Royal Enfield Meteor 350 and a Honda Rebel 300, and it wasn't 100 pounds. It wasn't as high as I said it was. You guys, any actual guesses?
From you guys? 60 pounds?
60 pounds. What about you, Lance?
Yeah, sounds about right.
60 pounds. 49 pounds. 50 pounds.
Wow.
50 pounds lighter is the Honda Rebel 300, which is significant, quite significant. But I over condemned Royal Enfield, and I just wanted to call out the correction before it makes it to
I stand behind my recommendation. I think the Meteor 350 is a pleasant little bike for a beginner.
Yeah.
Anyway, Zach, what
Yes.
is question number 4 that we pitched to ChatGPT?
What is the hardest skill to learn when learning to ride a motorcycle? What is the hardest skill to learn? And again, this is broad. It's as difficult. But Lance, I would just encourage you to, pick something really stands out to you as the hardest skill to learn when learning to ride a motorcycle.
So I think the hardest skill to learn is the hardest because new riders don't know they need to learn it. And that's visual scanning. Everybody knows you need to learn how to use a clutch. Everybody knows you need to learn how to brake and not lock up your brakes and all that, but what you don't necessarily ever get taught is visual scanning on the road, on the street, looking for hazards, predicting hazards. And I'll tell you, I thought I was a pretty good rider. I'd taken formal training and track courses and all sorts. And then the first time I did the Stay and Safe course with Larry Grodsky, who invented it, and I learned, wow, there's a whole nother level of awareness that I didn't even know existed. And so that's magnified for a beginner rider. They don't know they need to learn it, so it's the hardest to learn.
Right. Okay. I like that. Spurge?
I think I would like to digest that one maybe as a potential podcast episode in its own right, because I think there's a lot to unpack there. If I had to make a predictive guess, I would feel like AI would come back and say countersteering. I feel like countersteering is something that is talked about a lot as a difficult skill to master. That's not my answer. My answer is actually understanding how to feel comfortable letting the bike move underneath you. This is something where a lot of new riders, when they get out into the highway or they get out into an open road and they get hit by a gust of wind or a tractor trailer truck blows by them and the bike starts to shake underneath them, it is this panic moment. And it's hard to teach people how to just be comfortable with that. I think off-road riding helps a lot with learning how to allow the bike to move underneath you a little bit. And that's why you see a lot of riders that come from the off-road world have an easy time transitioning to the street. But that would be my answer is grasping the comfort, being comfortable in allowing the bike to move underneath you.
Like the bike leaning and moving underneath you in a way that just a four-wheel vehicle just doesn't do.
If you hit if a wind gust off a trailer truck knocks the bike a little bit, or if you hit the rain grooves in a road and all of a sudden you start to panic,
right. Okay.
That's something that you don't necessarily have in a car.
Right. Okay. Well, those are both good answers. One thing that I think is interesting about riding a motorcycle is how each of your appendages do. I think about when I decelerate at the bottom of the off ramp. When I come to the office, I come off the freeway and I go down through a couple curves on the off ramp and I come through the traffic light intersection at the bottom. And I was noticing today that, I'm braking with my I'm braking with my right hand and I'm using the clutch with my left hand, and I'm blipping the throttle to downshift with my right hand, and I'm pushing down on the shift lever with my left foot, and I'm using the rear brake with my right foot. So I'm using both hands and both feet to control things at the same time in sync and all that jazz. And that is something you do with a car to a certain extent, right? You have to use both feet to drive a manual transmission, for example. But I think with motorcycles, that's accentuated. And I think having control over the front brake and rear brake, for example, is something that is a weird thing in motorcycling, and using both hands and both feet to control the vehicle at all times is a difficult thing to master. So that's my long answer made short.
And the fact that, can you think of a car that has different ways of braking? Like every car that I could think of, you push down on the pedal on the left. Right. Whereas with motorcycles, some motorcycles have link brakes, some motorcycles have semi-link brakes, some motorcycles have, there's so many different variations depending on the bike that you're looking at. And I think that kind of throws a wrench in that too. That's a good answer. Good answer.
Okay. Let's see what AI has to say. Answer from ChatGPT is: the hardest part about riding a motorcycle can vary depending on your experience level. Well, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? But generally, beginners and even experienced riders face challenges in the following areas. And I quote: balancing the bike, clutch and throttle coordination, braking and stopping, handling at high speeds, cornering and leaning, situational awareness, and riding in traffic. Wow. That's a mouthful. It listed basically all the things that you can be challenged with, I guess. Is that that's a more comprehensive answer than I was expecting. Is it? What do you guys think? Is it too general or is it accurate?
Lance?
I was surprised that it came up with actually 2 items that I think address some of what I was talking about, which is the situational awareness. And I mean,
that's basically what you said was sort of visual scanning is kind of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say, if I were talking to a beginning rider, I would go into much more specifics about, looking where you want to go with your eyes and the visual awareness of how your body works with your vision and all that. But, considering what we're dealing with here, I think I'm surprised that it came that close to addressing what I thought was a fairly esoteric point.
Yeah. I agree. I'm impressed. Spurge, it said balancing the bike
handling at high speeds
and handling at high speeds, which I think and cornering and leaning, which is sort of like, I feel like the bike moving underneath you, which was sort of your call out, is pretty well covered, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I think handling at high speeds / balancing the bike are probably the 2 that I would be leaning here towards. I think, my call out about, one of the questions we get is, from new riders is they hear the word counter steering and they get kind of confused by all that. And I think cornering and leaning would fall under, how to actually turn a motorcycle.
Right.
It's a comprehensive list, even as I think about, yours, Zach. It's the clutch and throttle coordination along with braking and stopping.
Yep.
It kind of answered all of our questions in one. I don't know if that makes it the right answer, because what we did ask was, what's the hardest skill to learn when riding a motorcycle? Right.
And it gave a blanket.
It just kind of gave response, everything.
The answer is all of them.
Yeah.
Which is the hardest.
Exactly right.
Yeah, the answer is all of them. Yes.
Yeah. And so I had a buddy years ago who was wanted to get a bike, and he said, he's a very measured and calm person. And I thought, I thought he had a good personality for riding motorcycles. And I think up to this point, he's proven that that's true. But he's basically said, he kind of asked me this question to some extent. He said, what's the, what am I going to be challenged by? And what are things that I'm maybe not expecting or something like that? And what I told him was that, that feeling you get when you're driving down the road in a car and you're like, oh, I'm going to change the radio station, or I'm going to skip to the next music track or something like that. And then a car goes the other direction and through a puddle and blasts a bunch of water on your windshield. And you're like, oh, I got to turn on the windshield wipers. And then right as you go to turn on the windshield wipers, someone pulls out in front of you. And then you're still kind of thinking about the music. And then your cell phone rings and starts vibrating in the cup holder. And you're like, your brain's being taken in all these directions and you're really distracted for that moment. And you're kind of overwhelmed. You're like, oh shoot, I have a red light coming up, and am I in the right lane? And am I doing this right? And am I doing that right? We rarely have that in cars, I think, because we feel safe and cars are so accommodating. But that feeling of overwhelm, that feeling of being overwhelmed and thinking I can't process everything that's happening, I think that is more likely to happen on a motorcycle. And I tried to explain that to him and say, you're going to have that feeling of coming up to an intersection and being like, oh, I got to pull in the clutch and I'm supposed to use my back brake too. And oh, the light's yellow now. And oh, do I go through? Do I not go through? And and that feeling, I think, is something that is dangerous on a road and more common on motorcycles. And to your point, Lance, kind of encapsulates all of these, or it can encapsulate all of these things.
But I think it's important for new riders that might be listening to understand that there is a point where these hurdles are overcome. There is a point where, I don't think about clutch and throttle coordination. I don't think about braking and stopping. Yes, right. I don't think about handling at high speeds or cornering and leaning. It's all kind of second nature at a certain point. But maybe to what you're trying to say, Zach, is that the barrier of getting there might seem a bit more intimidating on a motorcycle than in a car.
And the consequences are higher. So I think that's part of it, right? There can be a situation in a car where you're a little bit overwhelmed by the situation, but in general, you feel secure. Whereas if you're a little bit overwhelmed by a situation on a motorcycle, maybe you don't feel as secure. And that adds to your angst and your, the nerves or whatever. And not to mention it's a more difficult vehicle and more nuanced vehicle to control. So, I don't know, guys. I don't know if we're done with this discussion quite yet, but I feel like I'm ready to give a letter grade here.
Lance, any final thoughts?
No, I want to hear Zach's letter grade.
I would say, well, okay. What's the hardest skill to learn when riding a motorcycle? I I feel I don't see a lot of problems with this. I was going to go A- for this. I think it didn't answer the question with a single answer, but I don't think you can answer it with a single answer. You can't just say like learning to use a clutch is the hardest part. Fact. That's just not true. So I think it's a pretty comprehensive, it offers pretty comprehensive coverage on the most difficult things the things that people often struggle with. And I don't know. I'm going A-. What about you,
Lance, letter grade?
I'm going to disagree a little bit. I would give it an A- or an A if it had answered the question, but it didn't answer the question. It said hardest, not give us all of them. Give us the hardest ones, not all the ones that are hard. So I mean, I agree. It's a good list of things to be aware of, but the best I can do is a B because it didn't answer the question.
Okay. So I think that if I were someone typing this into AI saying, I'm just going to learn how to ride a motorcycle. What's the hardest skill to learn? I'm maybe a little bit intimidated. I think this breakdown, while it didn't specifically answer a question, from like a stop fact period, I do think this is a great comprehensive answer that's still concise enough that would allow people to say, oh, well, these are the top 7 things that I need to be mindful of when riding a motorcycle. And maybe that is in turn the answer of these. The hardest skill about riding a motorcycle is that the whole thing is difficult and challenging in a way that you're not used to. I would give it an A. I think this is a good answer.
So we got a B, we got an A-, and we got an A. I think, yeah, the thing that impressed me the most is that it went as so far as to kind of encapsulate what you had said, Lance, about, the sort of like having to be more aware when you're on a motorcycle than when you're in a car. I don't think that's something that a lot of people consider. I think they assume that controlling the bike and, using the throttle with your hand instead of your foot is going to be hard, or like, controlling the clutch or balancing because it can tip over. Those are the things that immediately come to mind, I think, for people, but I don't think they really think as far ahead as you did about how cognitively it is more challenging.
But I think that's one of my biggest gripes with drivers in general is I don't think people take driving as serious. And I don't want to go down this road.
Of another podcast.
Yeah, I just don't. Man. I don't think people take driving as seriously as they should, because you should absolutely be using your eyes nonstop and checking your mirrors. My wife and I fight about this all the time. I mean, we should bring her. She
always puts on the blindfold and heads out on the road.
But it's true. I think Lance's answer is great. I don't want to go down that road. I think it is entirely another podcast. I think the reason that I gave it an A was that I felt like the 3 of us each gave a completely different answer as to what we thought was the most difficult. And AI did a really good job of summing up all 3 of our answers with its response. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Right. Okay, fair enough. All right, Spurge, let's move on. This
question
next one,
number
I'm
5,
intrigued by this next one.
Question number 5. What is the best sport bike of all time? Lance Oliver, you get to go first. What is the best sport bike of all time?
Best.
I love
best. I mean, do you so it's a sport bike, so I presume you define best by having the absolute highest level of capability, in which case you have to choose some latest greatest 200 horsepower thing with all the I guess that's how you define best in a sport category. But I don't know. I mean, I'm almost tempted to say best in the sense of sort of having been, important in the history of sport bikes, and say a Suzuki GSX-R 750 is the best sport bike. Is it the fastest lapper on the track? No, but doesn't even, I don't know. I'm stuck on the word best. Get me off of this, guys. Someone take over.
Well, no. So, Lance, thank you for that very concise answer. I was actually leaning, and I talked about this a little bit with Zack, because for those of you listening, we have not seen AI's answers. We helped producer Chase come up with the questions, but we haven't seen AI's answers up until now. My gut reaction when we came up with this question, it was the Suzuki GSX-R, either 750 or 1000. or even like just the Suzuki GSXR in general. Because when I was working at a dealership level, we would have people come into the shop and they would say, "Oh, I want a Suzuki GSXR. I want a Gixxer." Right. And we didn't sell Suzuki. We sold Honda and Kawasaki. And we would say, "Well, we don't sell Suzukis here." And they're like, "No, it's right there on the floor." And they would be pointing at like a Ninja 1000. And in their mind, Gixxer was just synonymous with Sportbike. And
it was like Kleenex or Band-Aid. It was like, it was a brand that took over the category.
Exactly. Right. And so like, I think you could probably argue that with like Ninja or CBR, but like in my mind, I think the Suzuki GSXR line just stands out as something that was like that quintessential sport bike. And then even the Dave the Gixxer episode where you took a 10-year-old, Zack and Ari took a 10-year-old Suzuki Gixxer 1000 and took it to the track and beat some of the latest and greatest technology of the time. So,
right. So you guys are both sort of leaning toward, for different
Lance
reasons.
didn't lean towards anything. Lance didn't say anything.
Well, you're right. He waffled a lot.
He said he made fun of me for not being very concise, but if we time those answers out, I think his was just as long as mine.
So
put the clock on that, Chase.
What I'm getting from
Making him laugh.
Each and both of you is that the Suzuki GSXR 750, say from 1985, 1986, would be the best sport bike of all time because it is the grandfather of all sport bikes. Because without that bike, no sport bike would exist. How could that not be the best one? It was the first one. That's one answer that you could give, right?
Yeah, that's one answer.
What's your answer, Zach?
I don't know. You guys set a terrible stage for me here. Thanks for warming up the crowd. Jeez Louise.
Just jump in and tell us what the best sport bike of all time was, Zach.
The best sport bike of all time is the 2024 BMW M1000RR because it won the World Superbike Championship. Ipso facto, it is the best motorcycle in the world in 2024, and 2024 is the furthest into the future we've ever been. And so it is the best motorcycle. It is the best sport bike that has ever graced this planet.
But
primary recency effect in action.
Did the M1000RR win the championship, or did Toprak Rescaldiago win the championship, considering that none of the other BMWs were in the top 5?
Fair enough. Well, obviously, I don't completely stand behind that answer, but that's what I'm going to give for now. And then we're going to read AI's answer.
Okay.
AI's answer is ultimately the best sport bike of all time depends on your criteria.
Of course.
And the kind of riding experience you prefer.
Ridiculous.
If we're talking about pure performance, the Yamaha RZF R1, the Suzuki GSXR 1000, and Kawasaki's ZX-10R are some of the top contenders. For design and innovation, the Ducati 1199 Panigale and the Honda CBR 1000RR stand out. And for those looking for speed and top-end performance, the Suzuki Hayabusa and Kawasaki ZX-14R are iconic. It keeps going. If you're seeking the perfect blend of agility, track prowess, and daily usability.
No. Okay.
I feel like this is just waffling. It's not giving specifics. It then goes on to kind of define Yamaha R1.
Because a list of all of them.
Suzuki GXXR 1000, CBR 1000RR. Yeah, it's just like the top sport bikes at the moment. Although it does go into the two at the bottom is the Honda RC211V, which was not a production bike, but a MotoGP machine.
Also a ridiculous answer.
That was a V5 engine layout breakthrough in terms of technology and
This
performance.
is the second time we've talked about the RC211 in this podcast, actually, because we were talking about the Honda V3 concept bike and V5s. And so just call back to the first part of the show. Interesting.
And then the BMW S1000RR was also listed at the bottom, which is the predecessor to the bike that Zach's talking about.
Well,
although it's more of a hyper sport bike design for straight line performance, it still has garnered a massive fan base for its versatility, long distance capabilities, and unmatched speed.
AI, you are out of your depth.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
It's
terrible. This is
answer.
the worst answer so far. Really, really, really bad. And I've got a whole bunch of things a whole bunch of bones to pick right now.
Yeah, this is.
Okay, I'm going to start just because I can't resist.
Yeah, but what the audience can't see is that we have sub bullet points under each of these models, giving some of those extremely fun and interesting facts.
Just the some of the parts that you read, well, the part you were about to read that we stopped you to because it was malarkey. AI says, if you're seeking the perfect blend of agility, track prowess, and daily usability, the Yamaha YZF R1 or Honda CBR 1000 RR might be the best choice. That is a terrible answer. Full stop. The Yamaha R1 has got to be one of the most uncomfortable street bikes that I can remember riding. It's really not good. I love that motorcycle. I wrote a whole article this year about how I love the R1 and how great it is and how it plucks at my heartstrings. But it's so uncomfortable. The fact that it would list that as a one of the better daily riders, daily usability super bikes is, I can't get behind that.
And you're the master of daily riding, so
yep. I wouldn't say that, but
I mean,
you did. So okay.
No, I'm gonna throw it out there. You are the daily rider himself. Yeah, I think some of these answers are misleading for someone that is looking for a great sport bike, and they're going to think to themselves, oh, like, an S1000 RR is only good in straight line performance.
Right.
That's the worst one of all is the description of the S1000 RR, that it's long distance comfort and straight line performance.
Long distance capabilities. When I think of long distance capabilities, the S1000, especially the new one, is not
new one.
what
I know. I know the pre 2021, pre 2018, whatever it was, the sort of first gen S1000.
I like that bike. That was
round about 2015. Yeah. That was probably the best, like the most comfortable, usable super bike that there was. But the new version since 2020 or whatever is much more aggressive, and I cannot agree with that. But I think this is AI is pulling this information from everywhere, right? So I think that's maybe what happened.
It seems the thread that seems to run through this answer to me is it seems like they stopped scanning the data set about 5 years ago, because why are we talking about the Ducati that's that old and not mentioning any of the newer models of Ducatis?
True. Yeah,
it's like somehow they cut off the data set too early on this one because it's really out of date.
Okay, I got another one, Lance. I'm going to throw this to you. This is an easy one. Under Yamaha YZF R1, ChatGPT said, when it debuted in 1998, it was revolutionary with a race-inspired cross-plane crankshaft engine that offered incredible torque and throttle response. What is the problem with that answer, Lance?
That's not the engine it had in 1998.
Correct. It's not the engine it had in 2008. It's the engine it had in 2009. 11 years after it debuted. So it's just full of misinformation here. This is way off. I mean, it's just sort of like,
is that when they introduced the crossplane?
2009. Yeah.
2009.
Yeah.
See, I learned something, but not from AI.
From you needed the organic intelligence.
Fox. That's right. Organic intelligence is winning again.
That's right. So yeah, this is an interesting one. A real kind of like spray and pray answer, it seems, from ChatGPT, where it listed a bunch of motorcycles. Some of them you cannot purchase, some of them you can, some of them are 8 years old now. Very, very loose and kind of clumsy answer, I feel.
Yeah, the fact that it chose, even when it decided to choose a MotoGP bike, it chose the Honda from
2002.
Yeah,
it's like everything's 5 years old here. Nothing is current. It just seems like everything's 5 years old.
All right, letter grade for what's the best sport bike of all time?
Lance, what's your?
I'm going to give it a D- because it didn't misspell CBR.
I was going to say I'll give it a D- because it gives you like some stuff to Google yourself.
Right.
Like it gives you a list of motorcycles that exist, and you can, it's a beginning of your journey of finding out what the best sport bike of all time is. But I'm tempted to give it an F because it actually provides information that is wrong, or at the very least misleads to a great degree.
Yeah. I think you guys are being too generous. I'm failing this.
Okay.
Only because I that's my biggest problem, is that some of this stuff is misleading to the point where even if you're like, oh, well, this is a great start, but I'm going to rule out the S1000RR because I don't want straight line performance.
I mean,
maybe I'll consider picking up one of those RC211Vs. I wonder if I can find one used on Craigslist. I don't know. I think it's a bad answer. I think there's definitely been better answers from AI, but this is not my favorite. I fail it.
Well,
so a D minus, a D minus, and an F.
Yeah, I was leaning F. I think I could go F for sure. So I would just like to say that when I said the BMW M1000RR is the best sport bike of all time, I was trying to be really kind of like binary and linear about it because I thought maybe that was something, AI might suggest that type of answer. Mm-hmm. Neither of you might call yourself my friends, but you didn't ask, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think when the best sport bike of all time comes to mind for me, it's the Ducati 916. Not because...
But we did ask, and you gave us the BMW answer. Don't throw us
because
under the bus
you guys
here.
were making more waffles than a whatever. It doesn't matter.
That was Lance. I said Suzuki Gixxer,
What did you say?
I gave a reason behind it.
You said the GSXR 750 or the GSXR 1000. You didn't give a year. You didn't give. Oh my God. That's
anyway,
terrible.
Go ahead. Ducati 916. Tell us why, Zach. I, as your friend, want to know why you think that
you don't care that bike is beautiful and iconic. You can't see
it, but I'm actually on the edge of my seat right now. I'm barely hanging on over here.
He is actually. He just turned to the side, everyone, and he is literally on the edge of his seat. Anyway, let's move on to the next question.
No, Ducati 916. Give us your answer. Why is that the greatest sport bike of all time?
Because it was the beginning of the merge of performance and aesthetics in a way that would come to define the modern Ducati, and many bikes copied it. Everyone stopped listening. Who cares? Let's just move on to the next thing. Question number 6.
It's a great answer.
Spurgeon, take it away.
No, I think you're this one. I read the last one.
Oh, really? Did you do the last one?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, question number 6. Should I only use the front brake when I ride a motorcycle? Should I only use the front brake? Yes or no, and why? Lance, do you want to take this one?
Well, the yes or no part is no.
Nice.
The why part is there's, I mean, this is another one of those things where there's so much nuance. If you're on a sport bike on a track day, maybe you want to use the front brake almost exclusively. If you're too up with a passenger on a cruiser on a rain slick highway, you definitely don't want to use the front brake only. If you're on the dirt, you definitely don't want to use the front brake only. Maybe not even at all, depending on circumstances. But but no is the one word answer.
No is the one answer. Okay. Spurge, you, what do you got?
No. I'll keep it simple. Lance made a great explanation.
He asked me why. He said why.
No. Hey,
I was answering why.
No. It's a good answer. I don't need to repeat everything you just said. I agree with you 100%. Right. The answer is no. I would say I want to know why people I feel like this is a question that gets asked a lot. And I'm wondering, this gets back to the disinformation on the internet. Right. I feel like there's so much wrong information at times that a question like this even exists because of people giving bad information out there. But Zach, what's your short answer?
Yeah, the short answer is no. And I'm curious to see what AI has to say, because all the stuff that Lance said is just totally true. There's different times when the device is different. So I'm going to scroll down and we're going to read what AI had to say. Answer number 6 from ChatGPT. No, you should not only use your motorcycle's front brake. While the front brake is the most powerful braking component on most motorcycles, relying solely on it can be dangerous and lead to instability, especially in emergency braking situations. Pretty good synopsis.
It's a good answer.
It's a good answer, right? Yeah. I don't know. And then it goes on to break down the answer into a couple of other subcategories. Why should you use both brakes? When to apply the brakes? When to apply the brakes? Is that accurate? When you need to stop, right? Whatever. And some exceptions of when you might use other brakes. And just scanning through this quickly, AI says typically 70 to 80% of the bike's stopping force can come from the front brake, but the rear provides additional stability. In some situations, like riding in loose gravel, dirt, or wet roads, you might adjust your braking technique. Apply the rear brake lightly but steadily. This is all good advice. Would you guys agree?
Yeah. I think for beginners out there that are maybe listening to this, and maybe this is a question you have, maybe somebody out there in your world told you to only use the front brake or to never use the front brake.
Right.
I think it's important to note that at least the number that I've seen, on average, it's 70% of your stopping power comes from your front brake, 30% comes from the rear. If you're riding on the street, typically a great practice is using both brakes. And then honestly, like as you're coming to a red light, you can kind of like slowly, kind of almost let off the front while you're trailing with that rear. There's all different kinds of techniques out there. But I think this is a great answer that really gives a clear, concise synopsis, at least as a starting point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Lance, any notes?
No, I think this is the best that we've seen of the answers so far.
Right. Cool. I'm going to tell a story. When I raced the aforementioned Yamaha YZF R1 a number of years ago now, I remember thinking, interestingly, and I've raced many bikes on road race bikes on tracks over the years. It's very common to not touch the back brake. Literally just not touch the back brake. Professional riders at high level often use a lot of rear brake for a lot of different reasons. Amateur riders often just don't even touch the rear brake, not even once. It's literally just on the bike in case you go off the track into the gravel and you need to slow down without, touching the front brake. But it's common to just not do that at all. I bring this up because the most recent superbike, showroom superbike that I rode on a racetrack was the 2025 Ducati Panigale V4S. And it includes a system built into the electronic brain of the motorcycle. When you go into a corner, you're going down a straightaway, you get on the front brake, you're braking, you're slowing down with the front brake, and you're tipping into the corner. You're slowly letting off the front brake as you tip into the corner and lean over. It automatically applies rear brake to stabilize the chassis, and will even keep the rear brake applied as you start to roll on the throttle in the middle of the corner. You're leaned way over, and it's adding a little bit of rear brake just to add that little bit of stability in the middle of a corner. This is a technique that riders, very, very good riders on racetracks, have used for many years, but they've started to incorporate that into safety and stability systems because it can have that big an impact on making your way through the corner safely and quickly on a racetrack. So, just to tie it into robots making decisions for us, I rode a bike where the rear brake was applied for me without my knowledge or consent, and by God, it worked quite well.
So I'll throw out an organic anecdote. I started riding off-road on adventure bikes, and with most of the adventure bikes, at least after I started riding, there was off-road ABS at the front. So you come on a little bit stronger on the front brake, and you didn't have to worry about locking up the front brake. And when I bought my first pure dirt bike, I had gone out riding with some friends, and I didn't have ABS on the front brake, and I was probably relying a little bit more on the rear brake, and I was coming to stops a little bit aggressively. And my buddy Jeff Canary, shout out to Jeff, I was coming to a couple stops, and he had been riding off-road on pure dirt bikes for a little bit longer than I had. And he said, "Hey man, just so you know, you can use a little bit more front brake. Like, you don't be afraid to get on that front brake a little bit, even though there's not, off-road ABS up there, you can kind of come on a little bit harder, and it'll just give you better stopping power." And so I said, okay. So we're ripping down this little trail, and Jeff stops in front of me, and I grab all the front brake. I lock up the front. I flip over the handlebars with my brand new motorcycle, and I end up laying at Jeff's feet, looking up at him. And Jeff, without missing a beat, just looks down at me and goes, not that much front brake. And that was it. And I was like, okay. And you learn like where the balance is. But I think, it talks about that in exceptions, like the amount of front versus rear brake you use depends on how you're doing it, whether you're on a road race track or you're off road or you're on the street, whether it all comes into play. I'm going to go ahead and say to question number 6, should I only use the front brake and why? I am going to give AI a solid A. Lance?
Yeah, same here.
Zack?
I agree. You get an A. AI.
I think that's probably the best question that we have had yet as far as AI goes.
Yeah. Well, I hope it's helped people. Okay, so we are going to finish out the AI questions here with
lightning round.
Slightly quicker ones. Yeah, a little lightning round here of more objective things, like a little bit more trivia based maybe. And So we're going to move through these a little quicker, but we thought it'd be fun to, rather than put subjective things like what's the best color of all time, ask it something that there's an actual answer to and see how it does. So objective question number 1, Spurjo.
What is the highest revving V-twin of all time? Lance Oliver.
Some Ducati V-twin from 10 years ago. I don't know.
I was going to say I have no idea for the answer is, but my guess is a Ducati. Zach, do you have the right answer inside that noodle of yours?
Well,
highest revving V-twin of all time.
I remember when the Ducati 1199 Panigale came out, one of its features was that it revved very, very high. This is a 1100 and something cc. Not exactly 1199, I don't think, but anyway, a big V-twin. And it revved very, very high. I want to say like 11,500 or something like that. And I think a journalist at some point quoted it as the highest revving V-twin of all time. And I remember my dad said, no, are you kidding me? I've got an old Honda VTR 250. That's a little V-twin that revs to 12.5. And that was 1989 or something like that. So I'm going to phone a friend on this one and quote my dear old dad and say Honda VTR 250.
Honda VTR 250. Okay, so let's go ahead and get the answer. For those of you listening at home that might not know where this question is coming from, typically, inline fours have very high redline, and inline four has a very high revving engine. It's nothing, to see 14,000, 15,000 RPM redline on an inline four, but for a V-twin, its design doesn't allow it to rev that high. The objective answer number 1 to the highest revving V-twin engine ever produced is generally considered to be the one found in the Ducati Desmodici RR, which is the MotoGP inspired V-twin engine designed for Ducati's limited production road bike, which can rev up to 16,000 RPM. Zach, you're shaking your head.
Mm-hmm. I am shaking my head. Do you know why I'm shaking my head, Lance?
That's a V4, isn't it?
It's a V4.
It's a V4. It's a V4, not a V-twin. So swing and a miss there, AI.
All right.
Yeah, that's a 4-cylinder engine. So the question was, what's the highest revving V-twin?
And also it goes on to say, some modern MotoGP V-twins might rev even higher in the on the track, but there are not production motorcycles. And I can't think of any MotoGP current bikes that are V-twins.
No,
and you guys are the MotoGP experts.
No.
Am I missing anything here?
There hasn't been a V-twin, since the two-stroke era, right, Zach?
Yeah, the NSRV. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, we're not in this century. I mean, come on.
All right, so objective question number 1. I don't know if Zach's dad is correct. I don't know if some Ducati is correct. But what I do know is that it is not a V4 Ducati Desmodici RR. Great bike. Not the right answer. Yeah. So strike one.
Strike one.
Objective question number 2, Zachary.
What motorcycle has the largest engine? What motorcycle
production motorcycle?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure. I guess producer Chase will have to say. Do we ask production, or do we just say motorcycle has the largest engine? Because that is a tricky nuance. Like production. Let's say. Does he know? What did he say?
He just said go both. He just that really doesn't help us. Okay. But what do you guys think? What do you think the largest?
Lance, what comes to mind for you?
I think it was about a year ago. We did a story on Come and Tread about this guy because his bike was up at auction. This guy who built a 48-cylinder motorcycle in his shed over in Britain somewhere.
Right.
I don't remember what the displacement was, but it was a 48-cylinder motorcycle. It had to be big.
Well, what comes to mind for me is the Triumph Rocket 3, which has a 2,458 cc. I forget what it is, 2,500 cc's.
It used to be a 2,300. Now it's a 2,500. That's where my head was going.
2.5 liter engine. But I mean, what's the largest engine of all time? It's got to be some wacky custom, obviously. Like it's the Dodge Hammerhead or some bullcrap.
You guys might be right if it's a volume production.
But let's just think about that for a second. Is there a production motorcycle that is larger than the Rocket 3?
I don't think so.
That Chinese motorcycle that's competing with the Goldwing. What was that?
Right, the old Great Wall Flat 8.
No.
How big was that?
No, it wasn't bigger.
No, that was only like 2,200 cc's, I think, or something like that, wasn't it?
How do we define production? I mean, what about something like a Boss Hoss?
Oh, okay.
Is that a production bike?
That's a small block Chevy V8, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a motor. I mean, it's a.
Okay. No, so these are good. This is a good smattering of answers. Let's see what AI has to say. Agreed?
Let's do it.
The motorcycle with the largest engine is the Shamrock V8 motorcycle, which is powered by an 8-liter V8. This bike, built by a custom manufacturer in the U.S., has an engine displacement that's more commonly found in larger car engines, blah, blah. However, for production motorcycles, the title of largest engine goes to the Boss Haas V8, which are available with 5.7 liter and even 8.2 liter V8 engine.
8.2? I never heard of one of those.
They must have put a big block. I think the 5.7 is a small block
That's
one.
the
And
only, that's the only one I ever heard of.
One.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, anyway, so Boss Haas was that was something that we called out.
One of the answers.
I wouldn't. Is Boss Haas a production motorcycle? I guess it was for a minute.
I don't know. Depends how you define.
Okay. Well, I would give pretty good credit for
yes
AI
or
on this
no?
one.
Do they pass? It's a pass fail grade.
It's pass fail. Pass. I say pass.
Yeah, pass.
All right, they're one for AI is 1 for 1. Question number 3: Who made the first off-road motorcycle?
Whoa.
The first motorcycle was the first off-road motorcycle. There were hardly any roads back then anyway.
Right?
You know?
Like,
Come on.
yeah, Harley. So, I mean, I guess it was not even Harley-Davidson because there were motorcycles before Harley-Davidson.
Yeah.
But I guess my gut reaction.
Daimler, whatever. Gottlieb Daimler, who made the 1883 wobbly horse 275 or whatever, steam powered.
Yeah, that was
horse.
It. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's a good call out. The first off road motorcycle was whatever one you qualify as first because there probably weren't a lot of roads. But what do you think of more realistic? Like the answer that might be more satisfying might be like the first dirt bike.
No answer is going to be satisfying to me because you could say the first motorcycle that was built specifically for going off of paved roads. I mean, you could argue about that 100 years.
Well, this is like when did the first motorcycle race occur? And it's like, well, when the second motorcycle was produced.
Exactly.
You know?
Right. Okay. Well, we don't have a good answer. I'm going to say it was Bill Wilkins of Sheffield Field, England, who in 1907 cut his tires to look like modern off-road tires, and old Billy Wilkins, Sheffield.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
All right.
Okay.
Good guess, Zany.
Objective answer number 3. And then this kind of goes back to like, my point of like Harley-Davidson came to mind because that's the first major manufacturer that's still around, I guess. But the first off-road motorcycle is widely considered to be the 1913 Harley-Davidson Model X. This bike was designed specifically for rough terrain and included features like a larger knobby tire and a more robust suspension to handle off-road conditions. However, many motorcycling historians point to British manufacturers like Royal Enfield and BSA, who in the 1920s and 30s produced scrambler-style motorcycles for both use on and off-road.
Yeah.
Was Royal Enfield and BSA producing scramblers in the 1920s?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't know. Were they? Motorcycles were just
Lance,
motorcycles for a while, right?
Contrary to popular opinion, I was not there.
When you were in your teens, in the 1920s, what was going on in motorcycling?
Never miss a chance, do you, Spurge?
No. I can tell we need to wind this down because we're having too much fun.
Pass, fail on that one.
It's such a hard question to answer.
I failed the question.
Yeah,
you failed the question. Okay, yeah, the question fails.
Not the answer.
Yeah, I don't think
I've never even heard of a Harley-Davidson Model X though. Have you?
I just googled it. It looks like every other Harley-Davidson from 1913, as far as I can tell. I don't like.
Yeah, and here we are thinking that the Pan America was their first adventure bike.
True enough. The adventure is in the wrist of the beholder, as they say.
All right, let's throw that. Let's throw that one aside.
I don't know. I say fail. Okay. How many? There's more of these than I thought. Sure, yeah. Question number 4. What is the most popular Harley-Davidson model? Lance.
I should know that.
I'm guessing
for those of you listening on the podcast, not watching the video, the look on Lance's face right now is complete bewilderment.
He's wearing the hair off his chin from scratching it.
I'm going to... Geez, I don't know. I'm going to say Street Glide.
I'm going to say Sportster.
Sportster. Well, wait. Sportster S? Liquid cooled Sportster? They don't have the air cooled Sportster anymore.
Just a Sportster. Most
You're just
popular.
saying Sportster. I'm just
What's
saying
the most
Sportster.
popular Harley-Davidson model? Does that mean all time? Does that
Yeah,
only mean
who knows? Does it
2024?
mean now or
all
5
time
years
or
ago?
sales
or-
wise?
Yeah.
I think Lance is on
Who
the right
knows?
path with, and I remember the Street Glide and the
Today?
Road Glide are the two models that Harley Davidson sells more of than anything else. They sell Road Glides and Street Glides. So I'll go with the Road Glide just to be contradictory.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
but I think
yeah.
I think it's
Okay.
a Sportster of all time.
objective answer number 4, the most popular Harley Davidson model in terms of sales and brand recognition, it's a weird metric, is the Harley Davidson Street Glide. Oh,
Yes.
Lancy Pants. Nicely done.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a part of the touring family. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I don't know, like that's a weird metric to use to say the most popular Harley Davidson model in terms of brand recognition is the Street Glide. I don't know what that means.
I don't either.
But in terms of sales, that's a very clear metric. So I think, well, we can't really fact check this one, but I give AI a pass here. If it agrees with Lance Oliver, I give it a pass.
There you go. All right. So we're 2 passes, 1 fail, and 1 question thrown out. Final objective question number 5. How did Ducati come up with the name of its monster model? The Ducati Monster.
Well, they called it a monstro and they just translated that to English.
Good.
I don't know.
Good guess. Spurgeon?
I mean, that was as I understand it, that was the name, sort of like the code name when they were developing it. You know, how sometimes manufacturers will have, code name before they really decide on a consumer name. And so I think that's my guess. That's my belief.
Spurge?
Yeah, I guess my guess here, because I don't know the answer, my guess here would be, naked sport bikes were a new thing at the time. And so maybe they, as they were coming up with that name,
it looked monstrous.
Well, I was going to say typically, where naked sport bikes came from was people would crash out sport bikes and they would rebuild them without putting all the fairings and the bodywork back on.
Birth of the Street Fighter kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of where my guess of Frankenstein's monster kind of comes into play here.
Well, I happen to have insider knowledge here. I shared a lovely lunch at an Italian restaurant in Pasadena, California, a number of years ago with one Miguel Galuzzi, who is the designer of the Ducati Monster. He told me that his son at the time was into these little toys, little toys. You could like collect them. I don't know if it was like through fast food restaurant or just like you buy them at a store or whatever, but they were little monsters. They were, he was like, and he said his son was constantly saying like, Dad, I need the next monster. I need the next monster. Like, I got to get more monsters. I got to get more monsters. And it was like top of mind. So he started calling his project that grew out of the basement of the Ducati factory, the monster, because of his son's toys. That's what he told me. I think, truth be told, Lance's answer was good though. The point is, it was a nickname that was given to the bike in its infancy, and then it grew into the actual name that they actually gave the bike, and now this long lineage. But that's a fond memory I have of the lunch with Miguel Galuzzi.
Yeah, I like your answer, Zach. Objective answer
What's
number 5: Ducati's Monster model name was chosen to reflect the bike's aggressive, raw, and untamed character. The name Monster was meant to capture the bike's boldness and its beastly performance, giving it an identity that matched its muscular design and potent V-twin engine.
Mm-hmm. And it does, I see here, it says the Monster was developed under the direction of Miguel Angel Galuzzi, who was working as a designer at Ducati at the time. Well, now I'm questioning myself. Maybe I didn't have that lunch with him. Maybe it was just a dream.
No. I'm questioning ChatGPT. I think Zack and I are right that it was a combination of both of those, that the kid loved his monsters, and the nickname for the model in production and development stage was Il Monstro. And there you have it. I think
they have it.
Because that question from AI just sounds like totally making up BS as you go and trying to make it sound good. I mean,
the name was meant to capture the bike's boldness and its beastly performance.
That's a total BS made up that it took from some really third-rate brochure,
or someone, lots of people have probably, perpetuated that. Yeah. Because it makes sense. And maybe there's some truth to it.
I'm going, if you had lunch with the designer himself, I am not arguing with you.
You think ChatGPT ever had lunch with anybody who designed anything? Come on,
I don't.
Do you know who I am, ChatGPT?
So
Okay.
three. So out of the 5 objective picks, 3 we have ruled as a fail. 1 we've thrown out as just being a bad question, and then 1 we would give it a pass. So if I was grading this on a quiz, it basically ChatGPT has failed the quiz for the lightning round.
Mm-hmm.
All right, final thoughts before we move on to the engine sound guessing game. Lance, how do you feel ChatGPT has done overall?
Well, this is a technology in its infancy, and it certainly will get better. And as I started out this whole discussion saying, a lot of the problem with the responses we get are the lack of specificity in the questions we put in.
Sure.
So I think it's a start, and things are going to get better and more accurate. And it also is a reminder for all of us not to turn off our human brains and use our critical thinking capabilities to analyze the answers that we get.
Indeed.
There you go. And for all of the great information that lives over in Common Tread, that is collected via human brains.
Yeah.
Organic intelligence. Yeah, I would reiterate what Lance just said in so much as I would say the thing that I want people to do more than anything when it comes to researching, loving, being an enthusiast of motorcycles is be critical with your own thought. Like a lot of what AI said today was, well, it depends what you are. It depends where you live. It depends how tall you are. It depends how much money you have. It depends what your goals are. And that's, I go back and forth with people a lot who want me to tell them what the best motorcycle is between these 2 or 3 or 4 motorcycles. And I end up having to say, here's what I can tell you. Here's some truths I can tell you. And the rest I want you need to make the decision of what you want. And so that's my big takeaway here is that even with, all the knowledge funneled into just a few sentences, it ultimately comes down to what you want.
I love it. Okay. Speaking of what you want, Lance Oliver, I've been told that you want to play the engine sound guessing game, that you can't wait, that this is going to be the highlight of your week. So we, without any further ado,
did ChatGPT tell you that?
It's true. The computer has let me know that you have been dying to play this game.
Another failed answer.
Another failed answer.
Artificial
All right.
intelligence.
Well, all the same, Lance, you'll be using your real live human brain to determine what the make and model of this motorcycle is. Without further ado, everyone, let's dive into another round of Rev Trivia and listen to this engine sound.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
I am glad that I am not the guest right now. Lance, what do you think? Guest honors. How many cylinders are you hearing?
Big sigh. Big sigh.
I'm terrible at this game.
1 cylinder, Lance?
1 or 2
cylinders?
1 or 2. It sounds.
What about 8? Does it sound like a Boss Haas to you?
Doesn't sound like. I'm not even sure I've ever heard of Boss Haas. So to be honest, it sounds. Why is this? It sounds old.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm really unsure about that. But yeah, it seems like few cylinders, older engine. That's about all.
I didn't hear fuel pump. And I know that we've had some listeners write in and say sometimes you can
putting too much stock in the fuel pump, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's an electric start though, right?
Yep.
Electric start. What'd you hear, Spurge?
2 cylinders.
I
think. Okay.
I'm gonna go. I'm struggling. I grew up in a BMW Boxer household, as you guys probably know. Mm-hmm. And my dad was just saying the other day, a BMW Boxer has 2 pistons that move away from each other and toward each other at the same time. Like that's why it's called a Boxer, right? It's sort of like going for whatever. Though that in some ways simulates a parallel twin where a 360 crank parallel twin where the 2 pistons in the parallel twin go up and down right next to each other.
In a 360 crank parallel twin.
A 360 crank parallel twin where the pistons go up and down next to each other. This is like a la mini bikes.
My Bonneville's
F800 GS.
My Bonneville's a 360 parallel twin.
So, and I think old ones were as well. So, but BMW Boxers and Triumph Bonnevilles, for example, sound different, but they essentially are mimicking each other in so much as the pistons are moving and firing at a similar pattern, even though the orientation of the engine is different. What I'm going with this is I think this is a 360 crank parallel twin or a BMW Boxer. It doesn't sound quite BMW Boxer to me, but I have been fooled before. So that's all I've got for now.
My gut reaction, honestly, was that he somehow got an audio clip of my Bonneville and then I'm going to get it wrong. That's my fear here. But let's do this. Let's do hint number 1 and then we'll play it again for the audience.
Yes.
Not because I don't need to hear it again.
No, you're obviously very certain
the audience.
That it's a Bonneville. Yeah. No, you get it. Yeah.
So the first hint number 1 is a parallel twin.
Okay.
So it rules out the Boxer, but I think
it does. Yeah. And now I'm embarrassed I even brought it up.
No, but, I think you made a great point. I think your explanation was also one that was apt.
Okay. So I'm going with 360 crank parallel twin. That in mind, let's listen to it one more time.
I think this is my bike. I think this is a 2005 Bonneville T100 with Norman Hyde pipes on it. It's a Bonneville parallel twin. It's a Bonneville 860 parallel twin, 360 crank. Like,
I love your confidence, Spurgeon.
Yeah,
and I dare not go against you here. Lance, final thoughts?
Lance
is it a Moto Guzzi?
Lance has never trusted me. He's not going to just be as confident as you.
I think it's older than that. I do tend to lean towards a maybe a Triumph twin, but I don't know. It just
well, how much older can it be and still have an electric start is the thing.
Well, I mean, come on. Motorcycles had electric starts a long time ago, Zach.
Well, sure, but not consistently until did any 70s Triumphs have electric start? 60s or 70s Triumphs?
Yeah. My 70s Honda had an electric start.
I believe 70s.
Yeah.
All right. Model has been discontinued twice is hint number 2.
Hint number 2, model has been discontinued twice.
So I'm less confident about my answer now. I know. Well, the Bonneville was discontinued in the 70s or the 80s when Triumph went out of business the first time.
Right. But it hasn't been discontinued again.
I think it might be a Kawasaki W800.
When was that discontinued twice?
I think they made it in the 90s.
But that was a W650.
Yeah.
And that was 2000. It was discontinued in 2001. The W650 ran from 99 to 2001, at least in America.
Yeah.
Well, there could be some nuance to discontinued, but they discontinued the W650 and then they brought the W800 out, and then has that also been discontinued?
I thought the W800 was still going.
I thought it was still going too.
Okay. Well, do you guys have any other ideas? I'm naming bikes here. Come on, help me out.
I'm sticking. I'm going to go. I don't understand. This hint number 2 threw me. As far as like discontinued twice, I don't know what the guidelines of producer Chase is throwing here, but I'm going to stick with it is a 360 crank parallel twin from Triumph. It's the air-cooled 865 or 790 engine, and I'm going to go, if I'm going for Hail Mary, like all the money, I'm going to say that this is literally my motorcycle.
All right, I'm going to throw out one last idea here, Norton Commando. Which has been discontinued twice.
Yeah.
They're not making the new ones anymore?
Technically that's technically that could be it.
That's a good answer.
That's a good answer.
I feel way overconfident in my answer now. Yeah. I like Norton Commando.
All right,
Yeah.
let's just end the suspense here before we come up with any harebrained ideas.
Oh, Justin sent in an audio clip of a 2008 Bonneville T100.
Hey-o.
So not my specific motorcycle, but pretty damn close.
Damn close.
The Bassani Performance slip-on exhaust full-length megaphones was the addition here. The Triumph Bonneville was introduced in 1959. It was discontinued twice until the line started up again in 2001, and it continues today. So when was it discontinued twice? Chase.
Well, I guess it was discontinued in the 70s, and then again did they try again in the 80s or something like that?
Chase says that the Triumph Bonneville ran from 59 to 1983, and then in 1984, apparently they didn't produce one, and then in 1985 to 1988, and then again it started in 2001.
Oh,
Okay, so a little bit of a crack in motorcycling history that we weren't ultimately familiar
Listen,
with. You got us, Justin.
For what it's worth, I'm giving myself an
credit.
A. No, if I'm giving myself a letter grade, I'm giving myself an A
I'd have to
for
agree.
not getting fooled by Chase in at least identifying my own parallel.
You stuck to your guns, and I appreciate that. I was flailing about with Kawasaki's and Nortons, and you stuck with it. I appreciate
Well,
that.
I
Spurgeon.
appreciate the
You were right,
flailing and
Spurge.
Lance. Again, it's
right.
always fun having you play the game with us because you make us all look better when we play.
That's what I'm
games.
here for,
guessing you do
Spurge.
that.
I'm here to set the bar low so everybody else can hop over it. That's it.
Okay.
Oh.
Lance, we'll let you go before we do. Everybody, if you don't go to RevZilla.com/common tread on a regular basis and read the blog, the online magazine, there's a new story every single day. Much of that is Lance's doing. And we applaud you, Lance, and for providing the internet with motorcycle information. And I guess we should let you get back to your actual job.
I'll give one fun fact that AI is probably not going to tell you. The month of October 2024, Lance wrote, was it 14 articles, Lance?
Yeah.
Lance wrote 14 articles. Lance has not written that many articles in 1 month since 2000.
Since he was discontinued for the second time.
No,
I was discontinued
2016.
in 2016. Yeah.
2016.
Wow.
Lance wrote more articles in the month of November or the month of October 2024 than he has in almost 8 years.
He's like a fine wine. He just gets better as he gets older.
I need a life.
No.
I need to get out from behind the keyboard once in a while.
Lance, you're doing great work over there. For those of you that aren't following along, head over to RevZilla.com/common-tread and read all of the great content that we are putting out on a regular basis, including all of that EICMA coverage that Zack and I were talking about at the beginning of the podcast. Lance, thank you for helping us fight the machine. You were John Henry of a modern era, just swinging that hammer, trying to beat the machine.
Glad to do my part.
All right, Lance. See you next time, man.
See you.
Always a pleasure having Mr. Lance Oliver on the pod. He is a wealth of knowledge, if nothing else.
AI can't touch him.
Yeah, I can't touch him. You say what you want about Lance Oliver. He is as organic as they come. Okay, moving on. We're going to give away a t-shirt. As a friendly reminder, the way that you win a t-shirt is you leave a review on the Apple Podcast platform. That helps with distribution of the show and mostly just makes us feel good. So today's winner is Cadota 21. Cadota 21 is today's winner. Cadota 21 said, after catching up on the last 2 seasons, I went back in time to COVID era Highside, Lowside, and it's really fun to pick up on recurring themes in the podcast and watch you guys adjust the approach in real time based off of feedback in the listener comments section. Love the show, guys. Keep it up. So this is if you will, an AI t-shirt winner because Cadota noticed that we are picking up on themes in the comment section and adjusting our answers just like AI would.
I do think it's a good note, Cadota 21, and we appreciate you throwing this out there. Zack, Chase, myself, we sit down with the editors, we sit down with, some of the analytics and the data in front of us and some of the listener comments at the end of every episode. And we try to make small tweaks. It's where we kind of came up with some of the themes for different episodes. It's also sometimes where we've made larger shifts in cutting down not the news or introducing the Highside Lowside engine sound guessing game. That was actually one of Zack's ideas, but it came from different conversations spawned from ways to adjust the podcast over time. And I feel like we've gotten to a pretty good little recipe. However, we're nothing if not chefs in the kitchen, and we're always willing to make adjustments. So please feel free to keep all of the emails coming, keep the reviews friendly. And if you are Cadota21, you can send your address and your shirt size to Highside Lowside at RevZilla.com. And we will happily send you a Highside Lowside t-shirt. Other things too, as you know, we're talking about being chefs in the kitchen, adjusting our recipe. We are recognizing the changes that Spotify is making. If you are a Spotify listener, you have probably noticed that we are uploading a video to Spotify now, so you can actually watch the video on Spotify, not just on YouTube. You can also start to leave little comments on Spotify. We haven't figured out the review recipe for Spotify yet, which is why we are asking you to leave your Apple Podcast reviews as Cadota did. But don't think that we're not paying attention to what Spotify is doing. We are trying to stay on top of that as much as possible. But wherever you get your podcast, we thank you for tuning in. And now let's jump into the final Highside Lowside comment. And this is from George, who sent an email in. George said, in one of the episodes, I forget which one, because I've listened to so many, y'all talked about manufacturers steadily creeping up engine sizes and how that's generally not good for the consumer. This being the case, why does everybody dog on the Versys X300, Zack and I included? George goes on to say, Zack posed the question that if the Ninja 250 really needed to become a 300, then a 400, then a 500, then why don't people like and respect the little Versys a bit more? Great question, George.
Good question. So good, in fact, that in keeping with the theme of this episode, we put George's question to AI. The question of why does everyone pick on Kawasaki's Versys X300's engine size? Why, oh why? AI's answer? The Versys X300, with its 296cc engine, often gets a bit of flack from some motorcyclists, and there are a few reasons why that might happen. The list is, I'm doing this in real time because I've never seen this before. Perception that it is underpowered, adventure bike expectations, competitor comparisons, highway performance, and nostalgia and tradition. I see. Okay. So there's really the typical AI blanket answer of every reason you can imagine is the reason that the Versys X300 gets picked on. I don't know. What would you say, Spurge?
Ultimately, the Versys X's 300's engine doesn't necessarily limit its capabilities. It's all about how the bike is used and what the rider expects from it. I would say that if I was giving a quick off-the-cuff grade to the AI answer, it would be a D. It doesn't really answer the question. I think the question is a bit nuanced here. First of all, George's question is really good. If we are saying we don't want to see displacement creep in motorcycling, but then we turn around and we say we would love it. So often, Zack and I have said, we would love it if Kawasaki gave us the Ninja 400 engine in the Versys X300. The reason being is it's a great little platform that really just lacks the power to do some of the fun stuff off-road that you want. You could still have a Ninja 400 engine in this bike and have it be beginner friendly, but for those people that are a bit more advanced, it would be a little bit easier to wheelie. It would be a little bit easier to slide the wheel around. It would be a little bit easier to have fun with while still keeping light down with its lightweight design. That's kind of, I think, where our mind goes.
Right. The age-old thing that happens with motorcycles is that if the chassis is really good, you want more horsepower. And if the engine's really good, you want a better chassis. And the Versys X300 is a situation where the build of the chassis, the bike is good. It's fun. It's nice. It's a good size. and it just makes you want like, just give me the slightly larger engine. And it's especially frustrating with Kawasaki because there was the Ninja 400 and the Z400. And then now there's the Kawasaki Eliminator, which uses the new 450cc engine, and the Ninja 500 and Z500, they use the new 451cc engine. And you're just like, come on, Kawasaki, you've got the engine right there. Yeah. And I know you'd have to tweak the frame of the Versys X300 and you have to make some changes and some accommodations and blah, blah, blah. I get it. But it just seems like such an obvious thing that this new slightly larger engine would be plugged into the Versys X because, again, the platform is good. And because, as AI pointed out, the competitors are the Honda is a 476cc parallel twin. BMW just debuted that prototype 450 parallel twin. The CF Moto has a 450 parallel twin adventure bike. It's just like everyone seems like they're gunning for and asking for this bike. And I can't help but think it's because Kawasaki didn't do that. You know, other companies were like, well, if Kawasaki's not going to build a 450 Versys, then we will, because it seems like that's what people want. And it blows my mind that Kawasaki hasn't done that, because it seems like everyone else is doing it now.
But even when we talked about the EICMA at the beginning of the episode, you have BMW, which introduces a prototype 450 parallel twin adventure bike in the little G line that's going to be F line, theoretically a step above the G310 GS.
Yep.
You have KTM, which just debuted a brand new 390 Adventure, and like Kawasaki's been sitting on the same Versys for 7 years.
Long time. I mean, no, longer than that. It's coming up on 10 years, I think.
I rode that bike when it debuted, and it was before you and I started working together formally. So it's past 5 years. I would say it's probably 7 or 8 years old. My off the top of the head guess. So. Well,
it doesn't really matter when it was necessarily. To answer your question, was it George? George. It's a couple things. It's the reason people dog on that bike is not because it's not a good bike. It's because it's so good. And everyone thinks it's such an obvious reason for Kawasaki to upgrade the engine to make it a little bit bigger. That's why. That's really why it is. It's not so much that people think, Spurge and I included, that it's not a good motorcycle. It's that we're just frustrated that it has not been updated with the same powertrain that every other Kawasaki in that bracket has gotten when it so deserves it. That's what it is. And
I think it speaks volumes to how much we really like the Ninja 400 engine.
Right. Or Ninja 500 engine, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. But it's such a good upgrade to what that 300 was. So I'm a little bit biased here, but I think Zach and I had a better answer than AI did on that one.
I agree.
But keeping with the theme, Zach, as we're kind of rounding down this episode,
yes.
Did you have any takeaways here as far as AI is concerned? Were there some standouts that made you feel one way or another?
Well, I'm not sure if anyone has said this outright yet. Maybe they have, and I just wasn't listening or paying attention. I'll say that I would be surprised if there isn't a time in the future when artificial intelligence is able to provide something like motorcycle reviews, car reviews, product commentary, product reviews, that kind of thing. Like, is there a time when you go to shop for a new washing machine or toaster that the people that provide that information wouldn't just be plugging all the information that they learned in their testing into some sort of massive document or stream of consciousness download of their thoughts and then letting AI create an article and we can read that? That seems like an obvious thing that's going to happen. And I am sad to say it, because I think that the color and sort of joy and texture that someone like a Spurgeon Dunbar brings to a motorcycle review when he rides it and writes about it is special and better than what machines can do now. But I struggle to see a future where we're not obsolete, Spurge. That's my takeaway here.
Do you think, and I wrestle with this a lot, like, do you think that at some point we will come around to a backlash against some of this technology, right? Like, there's a lot of conversations happening right now around social media, around, you look at what happened with Twitter and what Twitter was and what Twitter became. You look at, even some of what's happening, whether it's with, the Meta platforms or TikTok, and just general burnout around social media and online. Do you not see maybe a similar backlash of like, people want something a bit more organic? People want to know that they're talking to someone that's actually out there, writing and using this stuff?
Maybe.
Or do you think truly like it doesn't matter and AI is just going to get so good that like they don't want that personal connection? That personal connection doesn't matter.
I think when it comes to getting information, people won't care. I think if I'm looking for a new washing machine, I just want to know that I just want to believe that the testing was good and that the information is good. I don't need a personal connection there. But maybe with something like motorcycles, people do need that, because motorcycles are not washing machines for a number of reasons. First of all, the wheels, but also because of the culture around it and the sort of like, the connection, the community, the destination that motorcycling culture is for people is different than, just using an appliance. So maybe that'll be our savior, is that, like you said, people will want that emotional human connection ultimately. I don't know. Yeah, I guess it remains to be seen.
I guess that's my takeaway is I'm choosing to be optimistic.
Nice.
That, whether it's us or, we're long dead and gone, that like human connection will win out over AI learning, right? And I'm not so naive. I'm not so naive to think that like we need to understand AI as a tool in order to be able to make ourselves relevant in the future, right? I think that that's something that we all need to be mindful of. But like, I don't want to believe in a world where people would choose generic interactions with a machine over a connection with a human being, regardless of who that human being is. Like, I feel like that has to win out. It has to.
If AI is the answer, Spurge don't want to be right, everybody.
I don't want to know the question. As Lance has said, it's all about the question. I don't want to have the right question.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for hanging out for another episode of Highside, Lowside. Friendly reminder that if you're watching this on YouTube, please leave a comment below. We do take your notes seriously, as we've talked about during this episode. If you have comments, special cartoons that you've drawn, whatever it is, or a 30-second clip of your bike starting up, revving, and then shutting off that you would like to share with producer Chase, do send all of that to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com.
Till next time, folks, thank you for joining Zack and I for an organic experience. Real human beings talking to you, real human beings.
See you, everybody.
See you guys.